So it's January 21st, 2025, and we're in the first full day of the Trump administration, the second Trump administration. He was sworn in yesterday, and today is when they're supposedly going to be starting these raids, immigration raids that are supposed to take place in major cities across America. They're apparently going to be doing that in the morning, and we'll see what happens. I talked a little bit about that specifically in the last episode that I did. I'll save my predictions and my thoughts on that for now, because by the time a lot of people hear this episode, all that will be happening or will have happened already. So whatever's going to happen, we'll find out. I think there's a chance it's going to be a shit show. There's a chance that some of it's going to happen faster than we imagine. I think it depends on the city in terms of how that's going to go. So we're going to find out. And if there are meaningful resources that I can find for where people can show up to resist that sort of thing, I'll pass it along. But I just want to go over a little bit of what I saw from Trump on Inauguration Day. There's a lot of talking. He was doing like private speeches. He did his inauguration speech. He did some talking in the Oval Office. He signed a bunch of executive orders that they were handing him. A lot of it didn't even seem like he knew what it was that he was signing. They were just kind of handing him stuff and he was signing it. And, there's a lot of things going on. He signed something about saying that America will only recognize two genders. So took action, I guess symbolic action on that right away. We'll see what type of policy follows. So there was that. He pulled out of the Paris Accord on day one, which he also did in his first presidency, and I guess they reinstated that. Biden did, and then he has now left it again. So a reaffirmation to his commitment to ignore and exacerbate climate change. So that's great. But the main thing, the common thread that I was seeing and that I have seen in these days leading up to the inauguration is that I see this sort of naked imperialism from Trump, this imperial ambition. And I think that is going to be a big part of at least the talk that we see from Trump when it comes to foreign policy. And he just seems fascinated with it right now. He wants to get started with these tariffs right away. And it seems like the sort of leverage point that he wants to use to enact these tariffs, specifically in the case of Canada and potentially with other places as well, is he's saying, well, if you don't like the tariffs, then you can become a part of the United States. And I imagine he's going to try different versions of that leverage point to extract concessions in different parts of the world. We'll see how this whole tariffs thing goes. I think it's either going to get bad really quickly, or Trump is going to kind of like wiggle around and get mushy mouthed once it comes time to actually do this, because while it's something that he can do, I don't know if the leverage of threatening to do it is more valuable to him than actually having tariffs enacted. I mean, that is going to create a pretty bad situation, which he can afford to get away with. I mean, he can wreck the economy if he wants to, because technically, if we're going on constitutional terms, he's not going to be president for longer than this 4 years. And if he plans to run again or be president longer than that, then it doesn't really matter whether he's able to get reelected or not, right? That's kind of thrown out at that point. So for all intents and purposes, this is that campaign that we just saw was the last one that he is going to be running. And so, he can skyrocket inflation using these tariffs, which is what it's going to do. And there's not going to be any political fallout other than like whatever happens during his term. And, if his own people, his own supporters or whatever get mad at him, then I suppose that could make a dent in his policy, but I don't so much see that. And so Trump pretty easily and pretty quickly can create a disastrous economic and political situation for himself. And he just might do it. But I just don't know if that actual possibility is as attractive to him as the sort of power that he gets to wield by threatening tariffs. And this theory that in the long run, these tariffs are going to bring more jobs back to America, and they're going to make American goods higher value, whatever. I understand what the theory is, I think. The theory is that America has enough power and enough political capital around the world that they can raise tariffs, we can raise tariffs, and still be absolutely essential economically to the rest of the world, which will force different territories, countries, whatever, to adhere to our tariffs, pay us whatever we want, and continue doing business. And then it might bring companies back, and it might have positive effects in terms of American manufacturing or whatever. But all that is in the long run. I mean, that's not right away. Right away, what's going to happen is prices are going to get insane. They're just going to be all over the place, and they're definitely going to spike. And so I think the theory is that, again, it's what I am always saying with Trump. Maybe this is because he's a businessman, but he just thinks in terms of leverage. So, and I hesitate to call him a businessman. He's a con man, but still, he understands the concept of leverage, and I think that's what all of this stuff is to him. It's just leverage. And so he knows that by threatening these tariffs and by people being actually afraid that he might do it, he has an enormous amount of leverage over a country like Canada, which is supposed to be our ally. And it seems like behind closed doors, Trump has essentially told them, pay these tariffs or become a part of America, which is so bizarre. And it's easy to say that this is a Trump distraction. And I mean, it probably is. Honestly, the best prediction is probably that as we see this horrific immigration stuff happening, we're going to see Trump talking about all of this expansionism that he wants to do. So, it's probably the thing that he has identified as the best way to distract from the horrors that he wants to sort of enact on the streets of America is talking about this manifest destiny idea of America expanding and exercising all of this power on the world stage. And so he wants to talk about that, and he wants to get people talking about that instead of his immigration policy. So if I was to kind of adopt the idea that none of this stuff he's talking about in terms of foreign policy matters at all, and that none of it is attached to any real intention, then I would say that he probably cooked that up in the days leading up to the administration because he knew that he was going to need a distraction for the immigration stuff, because that was the stuff he was going to do so aggressively right off the bat. But honestly, I don't really think that I believe that all of this talk he's been doing about foreign policy, whether it's the Panama Canal or even Canada or Greenland, I don't think that it's just cynical distraction. I think he's saying some of this stuff because he actually wants to do it. He wants to see how far he can push it. And I think he's fascinated by some of these ideas, right? Like America buys Greenland or does some kind of deal where Greenland is a state, I guess, or a territory. I don't know exactly how that would work if it were to happen. But the idea there is that it would be a huge victory for Trump because they're valuable. They have minerals there and sort of resources that are valuable. And so we're not going to see an anti-war Donald Trump. We're not going to see an anti-war machine Donald Trump. We're not going to see an anti-establishment Donald Trump either, because if America is able to extract concessions and benefit from stuff like, taking over new territories like Greenland, that money's not going to you and me. It's not going to the working class. It's going to the richest people in the country. And could go a long way to enrich those people. So that's his number one goal. And that's what we're going to see from Donald Trump. He's going to be trying to pull off these ridiculous deals and making these weird moves on foreign policy that don't really seem to make sense to us, but really it's because he's trying to extract concessions on his end, behind closed doors perhaps, that are going to enrich him and his friends. And he feels emboldened in doing that because he now has gotten away with all of that same activity that he was doing last time. He was extorting Ukraine, he was doing deals in Turkey. There was all kinds of weird stuff going on between him and Russia. I mean, regardless of where we all fall individually on the so-called Russiagate story, you know, Trump and his campaign, bunch of weird contacts and economic ties with Russia. There's no denying that. And so, you know, we're just going to see more of that. We're going to see that exemplified on a national scale. And I would be surprised if any of it manifests as like the actual order of the international order or the national organization of the United States actually changing. You know, I don't think the Federation is going to be fundamentally altered by Donald Trump. I don't think we're going to add new stars to the flag. But I do think that he could push some of these conversations pretty far. And I think that it's most likely that he's going to fully overestimate his leverage and how much sway his personality has. And he's going to get us into an impossible situation geopolitically that could lead to war, definitely is going to lead to the degradation of the standing of the United States on the world stage. And Biden is right when he says that he set Trump up with a pretty good hand in terms of America's standing, and even like the economy of America, even though working class people are not seeing the benefits of that economy. Some of the things that Biden did throughout his presidency genuinely strengthened America competitively on the world stage. And so that's where Trump is starting from with all of this ridiculous negotiation that he's trying to do. And I think that's going to deteriorate quickly. And we're going to find ourselves in a position where we have much less leverage and we find out what are the world forces that we are truly beholden to. And those tariffs are probably going to help us find that out really quick, because Trump's wager is that we don't need any of these outside companies, and to the extent that we do need them, the cost is going to be passed off to the consumer. So those things won't change much, and what will change will be like, well, we can take it or leave it. But that's not going to be true. That's the whole reason that you don't want to start a trade war, is because suddenly taking us back as a country to the point where we have to be completely independent of most of the other nations that we are dependent on actually takes us back quite a long way in terms of progress, standard of living, economic prosperity. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens with these tariffs. It's going to be rough to see what happens with these immigration raids. Like I said, I'll try to share some resources about that. And the last thing would be Gaza and TikTok, because I think there's something interesting about Trump's approach to both of those things. And I'm just going to take it for granted that Trump is somewhat responsible, if not completely responsible, for the ceasefire in Gaza. Whether or not people want to believe that, or believe that he did it for the reasons of altruism, which I don't, it does seem from the sources within Gaza that have been calling for a ceasefire the entire time, they are saying that Trump is the one who applied pressure, that there was no pressure on the Israeli side up until this point to stop the war and to accept the ceasefire and to concede, make the necessary concessions to accept the ceasefire deal. Those concessions being actually leaving Gaza, not trying to set up like containment zones or oversight of the IDF in Rafah. All of those were the things that Netanyahu was pushing for before that was tanking the negotiations. And then all of a sudden, he decides to accept a deal without those stipulations. So that's because he faced pressure from America. And that's the kind of pressure that Biden could have applied this entire time. That's what's really important for people to take away from that, regardless of what you think of the fact that Trump did that or whatever. The fact of the matter is that the reason it stopped when it did is because Trump wanted it over by the time he was in office. And that was it. And again, Biden could have applied that same pressure anytime. Now, the question is, what is it that Trump said to Netanyahu that made him willing to accept that? And it's entirely possible that, the agreement is that if you accept this ceasefire for when I walk into office, then after a certain point, I'll let you do whatever you want. That's most likely what we're going to see. And then you also see Trump talking about Gaza like a classic real estate developer. He says Gaza is very interesting. They got a nice shoreline. They've got beautiful real estate there. And Jared Kushner has said similar things about Gaza, and this is what they want. This is why they bulldozed it and killed everybody there that they could and tried to chase everybody away so that they could develop it and make it essentially Israeli real estate. So that's what Trump wants, and that's probably the kind of conversations that are going to be happening behind closed doors between him and Netanyahu. But it's yet another example of him using his leverage to say, there's going to be a ceasefire deal right now, and that's the end of it. So the idea or the chance that we are done seeing that in Gaza is very low. But it is, I think, one of the first major examples of Trump really using his leverage as the U.S. president on the world stage. The other example is TikTok, which has gone live again. I don't think they've reached an agreement that solves this problem of TikTok technically being banned at a certain point. But I guess Trump maybe gave us assurances that they're not going to go after them for not shutting down. And Trump has essentially decided that he likes TikTok because he was able to use it for his campaign. They've realized that TikTok is an effective propaganda vehicle, not just for any old person or the Chinese Communist Party, but also for the Donald Trump campaign. And so that makes them a little bit more favorable to TikTok. But also, one of the things that he floated in talking about TikTok that perked my ears up is he was talking about going into a joint venture with TikTok. But the way he was saying it, and I don't think it would actually play out this way, but he seemed to be saying it as though like it would be a joint venture between the United States government and the entity that owns TikTok. In other words, the 50% of TikTok that is supposed to be sold off would become nationalized. That would be the consequence of the way he floated it. Now, in the course of these negotiations, etc., I don't think that's going to happen. He's more likely to sell it to some private company that he thinks is going to do his bidding. But if he thinks the best way for him to be able to control TikTok is to nationalize it, I think he should do it. Because even if he does control it and use it for propaganda and whatever, setting the precedent for nationalizing a social media company would be a great thing. That would be excellent. And that's the kind of thing that there are these little moments where Trump, in his bizarre way of thinking, he has these ideas that are like not traditionally conservative. And sometimes those ideas get momentum, and Trump can be a vehicle for that. So, again, I don't think that's what's going to happen with TikTok because he has too many of these billionaire oligarchs in his ear. But that would be a positive direction for the sort of progression of the tech world, for one of the major social media companies to be partially nationalized on account of American national security, supposedly, but also being able to control a very powerful propaganda vehicle. Could that be used for bad in the hands of the U.S. government? Yeah, sure, absolutely. Certainly under Trump it could. But the idea of something like that going from privately, the idea of a solution to this problem with this company of TikTok, this sort of self-created problem, but it's a predicament that we're in nonetheless. The idea that the solution to that is to nationalize it is very interesting. And I think that that would be a positive precedent to be set, which is probably why Trump won't do it.